All right. Good evening and happy Monday, everybody. It is good to be here. It is good to have been on retreat. We didn't have a stream last week because I was on a 7-day silent retreat at a retreat house. I hadn't been on a good long silent retreat in a while, and it was quite relaxing and refreshing, and hopefully insightful. But now I'm back here. It's was a smoky day in Fargo, so I might be coughing regularly throughout this live stream. We'll see how it goes. Retreat was great. There were 6 of us priests on this retreat, and with a silent retreat like this, you can't get them too big because the spiritual director, um, the spiritual director meets with every one of the retreatants up to an hour a day. So if you're going to have more than 6, you're going to need 2 spiritual directors. We only have 1, but it was a good number there. And very peaceful, staying away from the emails and the hecticness and all of that. And, I think God said more than just hi, but we're not going to get into the details of that on this stream. In the course of spiritual direction, I had just, kind of brought up that, one of the things that I do struggle with at times is spending too much time on the internet. And I'm sure I'm the only person listening to this stream who's ever had that problem, who's ever gotten into that sort of habit. You're all, moral paragons, and I'm just a miserable worm of a sinner. But the priest responded by giving me a very short little book, and I thought it was a very insightful read. It was a kind of a popularized version of a priest's doctoral dissertation about the connection between one of the capital sins and overuse of the internet, and he connected in this little short pamphlet the capital sin of Acedia with overuse of the internet. And I thought that was a very useful connection to make. I have a little bit of an echo. Okay, well, let me know if it's really that distracting. So Acedia. You'll commonly hear that term translated into English as sloth. And that can certainly be one of the ways that the capital sin manifests itself, right? In a lack of activity. But that is not the only way that this capital sin of Acedia manifests itself. Now, let's talk a little bit about what is meant by this capital sin, the idea of a capital sin. And, you've probably heard the 7 deadly sins before. And that's another way of talking about it. But I actually think that talking about them as capital sins is a little bit more useful. So what's a capital? A capital is a head. And the idea behind a capital sin is that's the sort of thing that you can fall into that has a lot of other sins that will flow quite naturally from kind of that first sin that you commit. So, we can imagine one of the capital sins is lust, and it's easy to see the different ways that can manifest itself in a person's life. Gluttony and greed are both capital sins, and you can see, well, greed could lead to all sorts of things. Greed could lead to theft, right? Or greed could lead to hoarding. Greed could lead to spending too much time at work when you should be doing something else, right? So these capital sins can manifest themselves in a great variety of ways, which is why I think that Acedia is better spoken of as a capital sin and as Acedia rather than sloth, because in English especially, sloth gives this idea of a lack of motion, of just utter apathy, and that's only one of the ways that Acedia can manifest itself. So I've got here a little bit of Thomas Aquinas because he is the theological sponsor of this show. This is the Summa Theologiae, the second part of the second part. Question 35, Article 4, reply to objection 2, where St. Thomas Aquinas gives a little bit of instruction on the daughters of sloth. So that's the way that St. Gregory the Great, whom Thomas Aquinas is relating and commenting on, that's the way he talks about these sins that come underneath a capital sin, is that they're the daughters of those sins there. So the first one that he talks about is despair, right? So let's talk about, before we get a little bit farther, we got to talk about what acedia itself is. I was getting ahead of myself there. Sorry about that. Acedia is sorrow about spiritual goods. Sorrow over spiritual goods. You could even say another way, the Latin word dolus could also be translated as aversion or pain, right? So it's just this desire to be far away from something. And the reason that spiritual goods can cause sorrow to people is that at times they are difficult and painful to acquire. So that's what this capital sin of acedia comes through. And the idea of it being a sin is that you would give in to the sorrow, right? So just because you might be struggling, just because you might be experiencing temptation towards it, doesn't automatically mean that you've somehow sinned and that you were supposed to avoid this. Just as if you're feeling some greedy impulses, but you resist them, you didn't actually give in to the capital sin of greed. If you experience the sorrow at spiritual goods, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have given in to acedia. It's only when you give in to the impulses of the sorrow at spiritual goods that you begin to actually come under a sin part of the capital sins. So we got this clear in our heads that acedia is sorrow or aversion or pain at the prospect of acquiring spiritual goods. So the first daughter is despair, right? That you just decide that you don't have the capacity to follow through on your intentions and that you are not able to do it. So despair, I think, can actually take a fair number of forms, right? Despair could be just lying down and not attending to things anymore. That's one way it could manifest, but it also could manifest in placing yourself out in other ways and going after other things, perhaps with a bit of frantic activity here. He also talks about avoidance of those things which are a mean to the end, and the matter of difficulty which comes out of the councils. This would be specific to religious monks and nuns like that. That's faint-heartedness, that you're not living up to the lifestyle that you have taken on by means of these vows. And in matters of common righteousness, right, the things that we're all supposed to do, it's sluggishness about the commandments. If men lead other men towards spiritual goods and come under acedia, it might lead to spite, where you start mistreating those underneath your care. And you can also get to the point where if you have bad enough acedia, you have malice, you have a dislike of the spiritual goods themselves, which is a very, very unhelpful place to be. And if you run away from spiritual goods and run towards unlawful carnal pleasures, that is wandering after unlawful things. So this is the 6 daughters of acedia there. And so I think at least, some of these might not seem all that relevant to us right away, but I think especially this despair, right? This despair. Now the trouble with something like pulling out your phone and looking for things and trying to entertain yourself is that perhaps a little bit of it would be just fine, right? Like if you're just gonna, you're in the middle of tasks, you're exhausted, you'd like to take a little break, maybe a little 2-minute break, that wouldn't necessarily be despair there. But I think when we get people who are, and I certainly find myself in states like this too, where you get people who find their life a little overwhelming, who find the good things that they maybe really value, perhaps relating directly to God. So they want to pray, they might want to do good deeds, or it might even be, sorrows about spiritual goods could be lower spiritual goods as well. We can treat it under both headings. That despair that comes in, where you decide that this is too difficult and that you're going to attend to lower things. I think that's behind a lot of people's overuse of electronic media, that they find the life that they're in difficult, that they're not able to go after the higher things, and the numbing effect that they get from the overuse of technology, the overuse of entertainment, is something that gives relief from the sometimes difficult things that we have to do here. So despair, I think, is something that we are seeing a lot of in our culture. And even if somebody's got glazed over eyes from having looked at their phone on social media for an hour, there might actually be some serious problems there. Now, the remedy for acedia is the classic. This all this literature about acedia developed in the Desert Fathers, and the remedy for acedia is classically that the monk needs to stay in his cell. He shouldn't wander out of his cell after every other thing, but they need to stay with it, to stay with the aversion, the sorrow, the pain about spiritual goods, and see it through to the end there. So this is just something that seemed relevant to me, and it seems relevant to our world because, as far as I can tell, people are using these things more and more and more as time goes on. And, it's not good to be caught in despair. And maybe you find yourself sometimes struggling with that too, being able to name the fact that you are maybe struggling and being tempted towards despair in this being drawn towards overuse of goods. We'll say the good of entertainment. That could be a very useful thing for you. So I hope it is useful. I hope that this rant made sense. And I hope that some of you decide to come on and join me in this conversation. The StreamYard link should be pinned to the top. Yep, it's been pinned. Ron was able to figure out where the echo was coming from. Are you talking about the first letter of John, where he talks about deadly sin? If that's what you're talking about, then we could start taking a look at that there. What about the true sorrow, despair that which prevents the pursuit of spiritual good? I'm not sure what you're asking, RJ. You can try and put a clarification in the comments there. But it is useful to remember that this was written in Latin and is translated into English, and so the words might have different valences in there. In Hebrew, we talk about yush. The remedy is called simka, which is translated joy. All right. These are common phenomena, and the fact that something would be written about both in the Bible and by St. Gregory should not be surprising. This particular passage of the Summa didn't have a scriptural citation along with it, but perhaps that was in the background of what St. Gregory was talking about. Yeah, that could be another source of pain. Certainly, not gonna pretend that that's not the case. I guess I've just lulled my entire audience into such a state of despair that they're incapable of coming on and joining me for conversation here. So I'm very sorry about that. Yeah. And the kind being found on TikTok as grads can't hope for jobs. Yeah, and I mean, some of that, I guess, is not all that terribly surprising. Yeah, that would be. It wouldn't be the pursuit of a spiritual good as such causing the pain, the sorrow, the despair. That would be more the loss of some other good, I think. Now, maybe certainly with the family members, it's the loss of the family members that would be causing the sorrow rather than the prospect of attaining a difficult good. Um, Now, the jobs thing that could be a difficult prospect for attaining a good thing, so that could follow out. And we've got our man from the West Coast here. Hello, Jacob. Oh man, I must have tuned in at the right time.
Sorry, I'm walking my.
Yeah, you're walking your dog right now. I'll take you off the stream for a little bit and see if you're going to catch up again. Oh, gotta love this technology, right? Yeah. So sorrow, right? In Thomas Aquinas's, we could say psychology, if we wanted to. Sorrow is when we lose a good thing that we were hoping to have. You can experience sorrow at all sorts of things. You could experience sorrow at the loss of a loved one, sorrow at the loss of a pet, sorrow at the loss of some good that you wanted to have, sorrow at the loss of your health. All of these different things, all of these different passions are common to humanity. So it's when St. Thomas talks about sorrow at spiritual goods, he's talking about a very specific type of sorrow where if you, let's say, give into it and give into its impulses to stop striving after the higher things, but to settle for lower things, to start snapping at people nearby to you, to let your mind wander to places that it's not supposed to go, that is always going to lead to trouble. Whereas if we're looking at the sorrow that comes from a loss of a loved one, trying to flee that isn't necessarily going to work. And, a certain amount of experiencing that passion and letting it have its time and place, because these passions are put here as a part of our human experience and, as a part of God's designs. That's a different sort of sorrow. So it is useful to distinguish the sorrow at the spiritual good as such from the different types of sorrow that come through just living on earth, and things happen here. So yeah, you can experience different types of sorrows, but it's specifically the sorrow about how good things are difficult. If you give into that, that's always going to lead to trouble. But sorrow about the loss of a loved one or the loss of something that was, let's say, genuinely important to you, but maybe it's in the more worldly realm, loss of a job, your car gets stolen, something like that. You're going to experience some sorrow and pain when you go through that. And if you're wondering why I'm shaking, there's a train going by. That always shakes the entire house. So I hope nobody gets seasick from the train, going by. Man, everybody just must be having a bad connection tonight. Oh. I think Ron had mentioned that he had wanted to talk to something about. He must have had something come up because he had reached out to me earlier in the day and said that there was something he was curious about. All right, Jacob must be concluding his walk here. That gives me hope for the future that there will be somebody besides myself to babble at here in a few minutes. But we've made it 20 minutes into the show, so hope does in fact spring eternal. I am wondering though if I need to check in on Mark because it's very unusual for him to not be here. Maybe he is given into sorrow himself. Matthew, there was a commentator who stated that the smell test, as it were, for deserter tech use is that which does not lead us away from technology. Yeah. So, I mean, that's a very pithy way of putting it, and that could be a useful way of doing it. So, like, let's imagine a good use of technology. Let's imagine that you are going to take a 5-minute break from strenuous mental activity. You're genuinely feeling weary, but you know that if you wander far from your desk, you are going to not come back. Let's say, just like I just need a couple minutes to recollect myself. You're going to play a little game of free cell. Obviously, the most superior and excellent of all of the Microsoft card games. Then, the point of the entertainment that you're engaging in is as relaxation to relax the bow so that it can be put back to work again later. So, so the idea of getting on and using this entertainment is to further some other end. And if that's the way that you're using entertainment to relax when relaxation is due, and then the point of relaxation is further work. Relaxation is different from leisure. Leisure is a higher thing. We could talk about that more, but we have a friend of the show, Mega Rodzilla here. He's going to go destroy Tokyo after he gets off of this.
Nandeska. How's it going, Father E?
I am very pleased to be here, and I am pleased that my retreat went well. And so
did God talk to you? Did God say hi? I hope he did.
He said a little more than just hi.
Nice.
But some of these things that come up in retreats and spiritual direction are pretty sensitive, and I'm not just going to blast them out on the internet. So
listen, it's just you and me and the internet. Tell me everything.
Just you being the internet. Yeah.
Right.
I don't want my spiritual insights to be crunched into a chat GPT matrix multiplication. So.
Yeah. No, I hear you. It's, if I could talk to myself 24 years ago, I'd just say, kid, shut up. Just go get a Bible and hide. But here we are.
Oh, okay. I've got a feeling you didn't mean to do that. Gotta love this technology. Don't you love it when you're just sitting around a campfire and the person you were talking to just randomly disappears completely from your presence? Just it doesn't happen around campfires, but it does happen with this daggone technology here. So is the word related to academia? That's a Google it question. So I guess Acedia etymology. Yeah, I doubt it. So Acadia is without, without kados care. So without care, so a kind of a listlessness. So I very much doubt that has anything to do with the academy. So.
Hey, listen, I was taken up for a moment. Enoch says hi.
All right.
Prayers.
Did you get to see Elijah too?
No, he was out. He was bowling. Yeah, it would be just a burning bush. It was a good time. We had s'mores. So my question, I'm trying to I'm trying to get a professional priest's opinion on something. I think I already have it, but I just want to put it out there. I was talking informally with someone. We were talking about the church as a whole, Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant. And I think I was maybe having a kumbaya moment saying, if the churches or when the churches come back together, it would have to be through the Holy Spirit. And I said that the Holy Spirit, the same Holy Spirit, was operating in the Orthodox, Catholic, and Protestant churches. And someone came on. Now, I want to make sure I present. Pretty much they were like, oh, and then there's a second part where I talk about my encounter with God, and it's, meeting him in a dirt field, having a new heart. And they said no to the same Holy Spirit in all churches, and that my experience wasn't valid because this is a Catholic person, and I know it's just one Catholic person. He doesn't represent everybody, but put that out the way. Man, I want to try to do it right, but it was like, he said that there was no miracle of when I had my encounter, so therefore it was invalid. And I'm like, that bothered me a lot. But so I'll take one. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. There's two things that we're dealing with here, and I think we can see them both right next to each other in the documents of the Second Vatican Council, which I happen to conveniently have ready to go right here on the StreamYard here. So the first thing, this Sacred Council wishes to turn its attention first to the Catholic faithful, basing itself upon sacred scripture and tradition. It teaches that the Church, now sojourning on earth in exile, is necessary for salvation. So, Christ present to us in his body, which is the Church, is one mediator and the unique way to salvation. In explicit terms, he himself affirmed the necessity of faith and baptism, and thereby affirmed also the necessity of the Church through baptism as the door through men into the Church. Whosoever, therefore, knowing that the Catholic Church was made necessary by Christ and would refuse to enter or remain in it, could not be saved, right? So there's this very, if somebody is convinced that the Catholic Church was made necessary by Christ and refuses to be a part of it, like that's not good, right? And you would actually be acting against your conscience at that point. So, I certainly recommend against that. So this is the Second Vatican Council statement on the Catholic belief that the true Church of Christ subsists in the Catholic Church in hierarchical union with the successor of Peter, the Roman Pontiff, right? We can debate about that all you want, but that is, in fact, the Catholic teaching. Now we come down to paragraph 15, where we start to see how these other churches would relate. The Church recognizes that in many ways she is linked to those who, being baptized, are honored with the name of Christian, though they do not profess the faith in its entirety or preserve the unity of communion of life with the successor of Peter. For there are many who honor sacred scripture, taking it as a normal belief and pattern of life, and show sincere zeal. They lovingly believe in God the Father Almighty and Christ the Son of God and Savior. They're consecrated by baptism, which they believe they are united with Christ. So we got the money line right here. Likewise, we can say that in some real way they are joined with us in the Holy Spirit, for to them too he gives his gifts and graces, whereby he is operative among them with his sanctifying power. So that would be a way of saying that the Lord doesn't utterly abandon anybody who would have the temerity to not remain in the, we're not going to say that the Holy Spirit has absolutely nothing to do with Protestant ecclesial communions, but we would basically look at the fruits and see what we have there. So this is another one of those classic Catholic both ands. that we're dealing with here. Maybe the answer you were expecting.
Yeah, a lot more so. I'll be honest. I have a personal prayer request on your part,
Okay.
dude. I felt like I got shanked in my heart. It
Mhm.
it twisted me pretty bad,
This
and
was
I'm
this
processing.
conversation with that person, or is
Yeah,
this something else? Okay.
no, it was that the conversation, and to be honest, I felt it before it happened. I knew something was going to go sideways,
Hmm.
and I just didn't. He, I he said split, and I'm like, what? And I hit the wall, so to speak. So with that out the way, yes, it was that person. I did the whole forgive, repent, walk in love, and also stay away from dogs that bite. And I'm not, but I wanted to run it past you because if I'm wrong, fine, but it's nothing personal here. It's just, what is it? That's why
Yeah.
I'm here.
Yeah. And that's
So,
why I cited the Second Vatican Council, and as I've said many times on this podcast, I am actually a Vatican II fan on the whole. So you know, there you have it.
okay. No, that's cool. And if I may, let me try to do the follow up. Oh, yeah. It was about my encounter with God 24 years ago. This person is very smart. They're just, hey, Jacob, what's up, dude? Um, and I think, I'll just put it out there. I think they don't understand for either the supernatural or mystical. I don't know the right word to use
Hmm.
when someone gets a transformed heart.
Hmm.
I think there's some people, maybe on both sides of the fence, that just don't understand that God talks. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah. I think the word we would use in Greek would be metanoia, right?
Okay.
So that'd be a transformation of the mind,
Hmm.
and that's what Jesus says when he's, we translate it into English commonly as repent, but it's a transformation of the mind there. Um,
Hmm.
so that certainly is a part of the message right from the very beginning. So yeah, and some of us have the privilege of having grown up in the bosom of the church and not really having like a big metanoia moment, where
Hmm.
we feel like we've
Right.
just been here all the time, that we're just
Right.
kind of a part of the furniture here. So
Right.
it can be a little bit difficult to relate to where
To
people
someone
can
like
be
me.
and where they end up.
And that's actually why I wanted to talk to you, because I want to talk to someone who's not charismatic.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not,
yeah,
because that way I'm not looking in my own echo. Man, I want to be careful because I don't want to. I'm
yeah, yeah.
working
It's
something out.
triangulation. It's triangulation, right? So
Okay. Okay. I
if
like
like
that.
you can, if I can look at something that, let's say there's a Catholic group that I'm not terribly connected with, but they're also kind of like on the same path.
Right.
It's like,
Right.
well, obviously,
Okay.
there's something going on there because we're all these different. You wouldn't assume to
Ye-
be related groups are all converging at the same point,
Right.
as Flannery O'Connor, one of her short story collections is "Everything That Rises Must Converge." Uh,
Huh.
yeah, yeah.
Really? Lanyard?
So
Okay.
everything
I,
that
I,
All
I
rises
right.
have
must converge.
I have to say though, Father Eric is actually very charismatic.
Really?
It depends on
I
how you're
didn't know that.
using that word, Jacob.
The word charismatic usually means somebody who has charisma, meaning somebody who's has a how do we put it, leadership personality.
No, no,
Yeah,
Jacob, I'm talking happy, clappy, roll on the ground.
that was my joke. I would be very surprised to see Father Eric speaking in tongues.
Yeah, I mean the problem is that I read my professor wrote this three part. One of my professors in seminary wrote like a three part scholarly historical account of speaking in tongues, and it's pretty devastating, I think. But it's also a really long read, and they wrote it in the strangest way possible because they wrote it backwards historically. So they like start at the Catholic Charismatic Renewal in the 1970s and start working backwards. And part
Did they
3 hasn't been published yet, which is, the patristic and biblical times. So
wait, is it thumbs up, thumbs down? What do you have to say?
specifically, the argument that they make, and I think they make a pretty good argument, is that when you look at the Greek of the New Testament, the word glossa, which is translated as tongues, always meant human languages, right? So something that could be understood. So the gift of tongues would be like what happened at Acts, right at the very beginning on the day of Pentecost. It was believed that St. Francis Xavier had the gift of tongues, considering his extensive missionary works and his abilities to converse with the local people and to evangelize them. So that sort of thing. I got you. And if I remember correctly, there was a 19th century biblical scholar, like a German biblical scholar, very critical, liberal, anti-mythologizing type, that came up with the tongues of angels interpretation as a way to demystify it and make it less miraculous and more rational. And then after the early 20th century, the San Francisco people, can't remember the name of the church, when they went over to India and couldn't speak the local languages, they
Azusa?
Azusa Street Recital, yeah. So so that was their argument, and if you want, you could just look up Philip Blosser, Blosser,
So,
and
I've got a call.
All right. Ron is pretty far behind, and that's quite tragic.
Yeah, it looks like we're losing Ron.
We're losing Ron. And I'm just going to take him out briefly. If he seems to have caught up, then we'll put him back on. But that's and just so you know, Jacob, it is just the Diocese of Fargo, our provincial diocese. The province, the archdiocese in the province is St. Paul, Minneapolis. So
I really don't know what. I mean, I guess an archdiocese is bigger than a diocese.
Yeah, so a province is just a collection of dioceses, and the head of the province is an archdiocese. But they just have like ceremonial roles and a few prerogatives. They don't give orders to the other bishops.
Oh, okay. So then I totally misunderstood. I thought the archbishop was the hierarch over the bishops, but I guess not.
They have certain prerogatives and certain rights. So like if they wanted to call a provincial council, the archbishop would have the prerogative to call that. And they have certain responsibilities. But it's not a direct. You can't tell them how to do things.
So is it like a primus inter pares situation?
Yeah.
Okay. I've learned so much about Catholic hierarchy.
Yeah, I think it's fun. I've learned so much too, but that's because I'm in canon law school. So more than I ever wanted to know.
And to answer Paul Vanderklay's question on my channel, so the Antiochians have what they call Western rites, and I was very surprised to see our local priest here in Los Angeles wearing what looked like a cardinal's cassock. It was trimmed in red. So, yeah.
Huh. Well, how about that? They're allowed to do what they want. They're just Orthodox.
Yeah, it was trimmed in red. It wasn't all red. But,
yeah. Okay.
Turns out the hierarchy isn't this stark, sort of rigid, unchanging thing. By the way, Roland, long time no see. Hope you are well, my friend.
Hey, Mark. Yeah, doing well, thanks.
Good.
If we can go back to hi Mark. Going back to Acedia.
Yeah.
It was very interesting because, like I said, usually we talk about the distinction between Yush and Simcha, right? Which is I think so. You were translating. I mean, you said despair, or sloth?
So Acedia is commonly translated into English as sloth, and I don't think that's as broad of a translation as we should get. So just kind of leaving the Greek untranslated. I guess it could also be Acadia, and I'm just not going to worry about it today. So it's sorrow at spiritual goods, right? So you see some higher purpose towards which you could strive. You also see that it's going to be difficult, and that causes pain, aversion, sorrow. And you don't want to do that. And it's only a capital sin when you give in to that and go after lower things. But when you stick with it, then the temptation actually makes you holier. So that's good.
Yeah. Jonathan Peugeot says it's the sin of acedia, and he said it was the sin of attention, or more like obviously he had a video on this. It's probably 4 years old now, but he said like misaligned attention. Like,
well, that's one of the daughters. That's one of the daughters of I'm just going to keep on saying Acedia because that would be the way you pronounce it in Latin, and Latin is the superior language.
Thank you, sir.
One of the daughters of Acedia, which is the sins that can flow from a capital sin, is wandering after forbidden things. So that's one of the ways that it can go, but it could also. So like some of the ones that Thomas Aquinas mentioned, schism from St. Gregory the Great, are like spite, where you just kind of, being mean to people who are going after good things, or faint-heartedness in doing your vow, or sluggishness about commandments and doing the right thing. So, yeah. I'm going to answer Ron's question here real quick. Can you explain the word jubilation used by the fathers like Augustine? No, I cannot. I do not know how he uses it. I may someday have the time to look that up. So,
okay. So first of all, let me say to the people who are watching on my channel, I just put a link to Father Eric's channel, and you guys should go to Father Eric's channel, like and subscribe, because that's how it works. First. Second, so yeah, I mean, I was listening to you as I was walking, and I was thinking, and so we usually talk. So usually people talk about hopelessness or despair, and we talk about that includes you, Sam. Of all the people who should know to be subscribed to Father Eric's channel, it should be you, Sam. But usually we talk about simcha as joy, but when you mentioned the monks in their cells, it reminded me that we actually distinguish between simcha as joy with other forms of happiness, because it really has more to do with contentment, right? So it's a joy in what exists already, as opposed to the type of joy you might.
So have. I think we're so the idea I think behind the counsel for the monk to remain in his cell is that this sorrow is going to pass, and when you get to the other end of it, you'll find the joy there. And so hence it is proper to each virtue to rejoice at its own spiritual good, which consists in its own act, while it belongs especially to charity to have that spiritual joy whereby one rejoices in the divine good. So ultimately what Acedia is getting away, what draws you away from, is rejoicing in the Lord. But if you're able to pass through the temptation, remain in your cell, or however it works out in your life, remain committed to this good purpose that you set out on, then you will find joy at the other end of it. So I don't know if that's answering your question there. Yeah, but there is that connection. I just had to go up a couple articles to find that bit I just read. So
seems like they're very It seems like there's a connection there that I just found interesting.
Yeah, and all of this, our commentary that we get from Thomas Aquinas, he got from Saint Gregory the Great's commentary on the Book of Job, his moral commentary on the Book of Job. So it's it's just fun. All these things. That's a major source.
Aquinas was a priest. No one ever mentions that. It's interesting.
On the point of Eric, you were talking about using your phone being consumed, I guess, in some ways with the attention of that. And an observation perhaps for myself and watching my kids and watching people around me, is that a big chunk of it is I have a little bit of space, and in that space, what am I going to fill it with, right? Because we live in a world where all of the space gets filled up. And space feels uncomfortable. And I guess you're pointing to this aspect of kind of the difficulty of the spiritual path, right? We would perhaps look at the lives of monks and ascetics and sort of think, why would people deliberately take on a bunch of suffering and difficulty when the world that we live in is, how do we make things easy? How do we solve immediate problems without worrying about future problems? Future problems, that's a problem for future Homer. He can deal with that later, right? But that's the reality of the world we're living in, the instantaneous, the immediate. And so some of this is a mapping of the path of difficulty and suffering, and having young boys in particular, there's some aspect of like, well, they need some demands of that. And if they can see money, or I'm going to be attracted to the girls, I'm going to have a big body because I'm going to get buff and those kinds of things, well, maybe they'd be prepared to spend a couple hours a day working out or doing something else. But the spiritual disciplines, there doesn't seem to be any real benefit. Like, what am I getting out of this, right? Mm-hmm. And I think some of that is kind of a loss from the culture of, why would I do this? It's like, well, because of who you're becoming. And it's like, well, why does that matter, right? Why does it matter who I am? Doesn't it matter, what I've got and, my money and my body and my health and those kinds of things? And so in some ways, the aspects of character and the aspects of the spiritual journey are somewhat transparent, I guess, to many. Yeah. And so it becomes hard to engage with that because, like, why am I doing it? Right? The why.
Trusting. Make Final Cause great again. Roland, were you listening to my stream on maturity? Because not only did I mention future Homer, but I pretty much outlined all that. And I think that's a lot of materialism and individualism that causes what you're talking about. But the biggest single problem is we've invented this bizarre term called education. Wow. I know what people are describing when they're describing it, but that's not education. I suspect that it's just a bad word, and what people are talking about is formation. And around about the 1960s, maybe a little earlier, partly because of psychology, which is absolutely corrosive to the universe, people started treating their children as adults and trying to give them freedoms to do things like pick their own names and, which ended, hopefully, with pick your own gender. Although we're having a problem getting rid of that one. But you can see a clear path of the pick your own individualism.
I felt pretty happy when I was allowed to pick the purple popsicle, because that was my favorite color.
Right, but when you don't form people with a telos or a final cause, Father, where's the banner? Come on, we've got a banner for this.
Yeah.
When you don't form people using the final cause, then it's a good point. The why can't, technically speaking, you cannot use logic, reason, and rationality to answer the why. The why has to be answered by a final cause. There's no other way for it. Just like efficiency doesn't mean anything by itself. It needs to have a goal first, and then efficiency can have a meaning.
And that's why I think the line, one of the few lines, so Pope Benedict had some real bangers while he was alive. May he rest in peace. And his encyclical Deus Caritas Est, God is Love, began with a great line that Christianity isn't an ideal or an ethical system, but it is an encounter with a person, the living person of Jesus Christ there. And so that's why you'll, if you're with Christian missionary groups and that sort of thing, it's all about trying to make that connection between the Lord and the people that they're dealing with, because when you actually have that, and you have that that metanoia, that transformation of the mind that comes from meeting him, then all of a sudden it's oh, that's why I have to do all these things. That's the final cause showing up right there at the beginning, first in order of intention, last in the order of execution. So yes, final cause will be great, made great in the end, because it's the first in order of intention and the last in the order of execution. So in the end, it'll be complete.
I have to go, and I could leave the stream going on my channel, but I'm not going to, because people should come to Father Eric's channel and like and subscribe rather than watching on my channel. So I'm taking it off my channel.
You're the best free advertising I could ask for, Jacob. Thanks for hopping on.
See you, Jacob. Mark, I guess your point about you were pointing to something with regards to education versus formation. And I've had some recent discussions with my younger sons who are in their teens, my youngest one in particular. And there's a challenge for them, right? It's I'm at school and I'm being taught a bunch of stuff, but I don't care about it, right? But I'm being told I need to care about it because I'm going to need it to get a job. And so if I want to have a job, then I need to care about the stuff that I'm learning, and I need to get marks.
That's materialism.
And I need to get this education so that I can have a job, right?
Right.
So it's this, I guess, utilitarian learning instrumentation. I get this information. If I answer the questions correctly, I can get a job. But now it's why can't I get AI to answer me the questions, right? Because important thing is the questions need to be answered. Then why do I need to know them?
Yeah, but Roland, this is the problem. When you're stuck in a small box made out of logic, reason, and rationality, that's fine. But I can tell you one thing, as somebody, as you know, with many decades of experience, the computers will always beat you at logic, reason, and rationality. They may not even be right about it, and it actually won't matter, right? And so that's a bad plan. And we're seeing the fruition of that with AI now, because A, they're terrible at it, but that's a different discussion. And B, they're winning at everything. I mean, the academics that I follow on Twitter are freaking out because they started to use ChatGPT to grade papers. And then at some point they realized the students had been using ChatGPT already to write the papers. And now there's a big AI escalation battle going on. But this never happens in a world where there's no such thing as education, but it's actually formation. And then you're forced to ask the question, what form are you putting the children into? And it turns out the answer, according to my video on, now I have 2 videos, by the way, 3 technically. I have the original live stream, a cut version of the live stream, and a follow-up. I'm going to do another follow-up probably when I get back from vacation here. But the answer turns out to be they're not formed, and therefore they're not maturing. And then you can see the immaturity across the board. I mean, everyone's complaining about it. The employers are saying, like, it feels like babysitting. And these are 20 and 30-year-olds. And we feel like we're babysitting. Well, you probably are babysitting because they haven't matured, because they haven't gone outside. They're used to an easy, smooth life. They're used to this video game reality, which is very utilitarian and materialistic. When you see these sorts of things, it could be movies, right? Video games are the worst because they're more immersive. When you see that over and over again, you mimic that. So your utilitarianism is getting baked into you by mimicry, not by anything we would identify as education. Because again, we've got this fake word education that, for better or for worse, now doesn't actually convey anything. And we think that it does, and we think that it's good. And you will be educated by something. And the question is what? And if it doesn't have a final cause, a telos, a purpose, then it's going to corrupt every single time. And it's going to make a small, flat world for you.
So I guess, Father Eric, I got a question perhaps for you. You may be required to provide some spiritual direction for somebody who's asking a question. It's like, Father Eric, I spend too much time on my phone. What should I do? And I'm a young person, right? I've grown up in this environment where I've got a largely utilitarian cause and effect kind of, what do I do to get what I want, right? So now, how are you going to sort of integrate, here is Thomas Aquinas, and here are the sins that the church would hold, and the
you certainly don't start with Thomas Aquinas, right?
Sure.
Like,
right.
I think the best thing you could do for somebody in that circumstance is see if you can make them some good friends. Like that can actually have a huge impact, right? So I think it's in Plato's writing where he talks about inside of a human being, you've got the man, you've got the lion, and you've got the monster. The man is intelligent but weak. The monster is very strong and it wants what it wants. And the lion is strong, but it's dumb. And so the way that you get to have the lion tame the monster for you is that the lion recognizes honor and does not want to be dishonored. And so you put yourself in a society, and you of people who are striving after higher things. And when you give in, you'll have some level of dishonor there. And maybe it won't be brutal, right? Maybe it'll be like, yeah, I really messed this one up, and I'm sorry about that. That's kind of a little minor level of dishonor. But that community formation, and maybe if you're able to get somebody into that kind of a community without being too hackneyed about it, it can start to have an effect when they can just see the way that these people are talking, the things that they're talking about, maybe an elevation of the discourse there over their maybe dumb hedonistic friends that they have right now, mostly over the internet. So that'd be maybe the most effective approach if you can manage it. That might not always be possible. But yeah, you definitely don't start with Thomas Aquinas. Like, you save that for the nerds anyway. Not everybody needs Thomas Aquinas.
Yeah, the problem with arguing people into and out of things is that if you can argue them into it, somebody else can argue them out of it anyway. And this is a bad strategy. And we could theorize that we'll say something like community is the answer, which I very much agree with. And my book will be out after the first week of September sometime. So you can read it and do it that way. But what I talk about in my maturity video is that people aren't getting outside and just experiencing things that will inevitably go wrong with regularity and then figuring out how to deal with that. And part of that is just being under submission. Like, oh, this person told me I have to go do this thing, so I'm going to go do it. Right. And so I kind of tell the story. I was visiting my friend's church. It's OCA, it's Orthodox of America guys. And the father there, we go back and forth. He knows about the meaning crisis stuff, and he knows Jonathan Peugeot, and he's friends with Jonathan Peugeot actually. And one time he mentioned a C.S. Lewis book, and he said, "You haven't read The Abolition of Man?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Drop all of your projects and read The Abolition of Man." I said, "No, I'm kidding." but I went home and ordered the book. And when it came in, I read it immediately. Because, it's Father Ignatius. It's not guy down the street Ignatius, right? And I know my place. This seems to be a smart thing to do. Now, did I really understand the book and grasp it and like it? Not yet. But I will read it again until I get more out of it than I did the first time. But like that, there wasn't an argument. There wasn't a discussion. He didn't say, I recommend the book. He actually said, drop all of your projects and go read this book. And then said, no, I'm kidding, right? Which is fine and fair. But like, message received. I just did that because that was the correct answer. And it wasn't a matter of convince me why I should read said text. And I don't like reading. So, it's hard to get me to read.
Yeah. Abolition of Man is not an easy one to read, but the structure is very helpful. And I've talked often about the things that I really appreciated about my formation, but it is hard to get people into a place where they can just go and be there and just trust it, right? Because like especially if you don't have like the experience with these things, it's like, I'm just supposed to do what this person says, like, how do I know? So which is why I think an introduction via friendship, where you can like get to trust these people, is probably an easier way in than just jumping straight into the hierarchy there.
Well, I think the increase in what I would call hyper-individualism, the fracturing that's caused, and the general breakdown in institutional trust and relational trust, right, leaves people in a place where it's like, well, the main person I can trust is myself, but then you find limitations to that. What do you do when you reach the end of that? How do you figure out who else you can trust? Like, if you are going to trust somebody else's direction, on what basis is it? And, my youngest son might watch Andrew Tate online because his mates are watching it. And so he's like, well, Andrew Tate's got a Bugatti and some Lamborghinis and a successful channel. And so therefore I'm inclined to listen to him, right? Because my mates are listening to him. So there's a community of that. And he's popular online, and he seems to have a destination where I'd like to get to. I'd like to be successful. I'd like to drive a nice car.
They're not listening to him, Roland, actually, which I find really funny, because he actually does correct his audience quite frequently, but they're not listening to him. What they're doing is they're mimicking what they see as valuable. So that's the materialism end. And then the mimicry, which is how almost everything you do happens. Nobody wants to hear that, I get it, but also everything you do pretty much, with maybe 2% exception of all the things you do, are done through mimicry. And so they see him and they mimic him. And if you watch online personalities in particular, but really any personalities, and you watch them closely enough, they regularly go after their own audience when they stray. It's just that they do it with words and it doesn't work because the audience strayed. That meant they already weren't listening to you. And so your correction is probably also not going to work. Now, it's not zero and it's better than nothing. So we should be grateful that they do it when they do it, because not everybody does it. But Tate in particular does. I don't like him for lots of reasons, but I understand. And like if you talk to Sally Joe, for example, she will explain to you why he's attractive to women. And it's very obvious why that would be the case. Nobody likes that answer. I get that. But it's clear as day. It's just nobody wants to think that they or other people work that way. But actually, he knows how people work. He's not wrong. He may describe it badly. His descriptions may be wrong. But the results of his actions, I don't know how you argue with that. I mean, I guess you could, but I'm just going to think you're a bit of an idiot and move on with my life, because he has exactly the sorts of things that he predicted he'd have from the actions he took. And, I guess if that's what you wanted and you made a correct prediction, kudos to you. That's how it works.
Right, but I guess mapping this onto the, shall we call it the spiritual life, right? That the life that is somewhat less instrumental and less materialistic.
Where are the spiritual exemplars, Roland?
Yeah,
this has been my argument. You know my argument from the BOM. My argument all along has been the recession of the church, man, right? For 5+ years, right? The recession of the church. No one, or almost no one, is out in front saying, oh no, I'm, Father Eric's a nice exception. He's got his collar on, as often as he can. And I'm of this spiritual domain, and I have some authority within this spiritual domain, and here are the fruits of my labor for you to copy, because the only people we have out there now are the Andrew Tates. And well, of course you're going to mimic what you can see in the world, and if you can't see the church because they're busy receding and giving up on running orphanages and giving up on schools and not fighting for Catholic teaching in schools and things like that, then what you're going to follow what you got. And so that's why on that point I indict the church as a whole, and I will continue to do so even if Father Eric kicks me off this channel, but that's okay.
Mark, if I kicked you off the channel, then who would I talk to? Here we go. There it is. Go to mass, go to confession, pray the rosary, don't skip leg day.
There's been a growth in prosperity gospel, right? Sorry.
But that's the materialism sneaking in. And the collapse is happening, unfortunately, for better or for worse, I tend to think for the best possible ever. The collapse is happening in the Protestant world, right? That's why the Orthodox Church is growing and the Catholic Church is growing. Where are those people coming from? Well, they're not coming from nowhere, guys. It's not that hard to figure out the math. So they're, at the same time that they're corrupting themselves with things like prosperity gospel, or have been all along, they're also losing people. I don't think that's a coincidence. Maybe it's a random coincidence and the two things have no correlative overlap or something. But I tend to think it's pretty clear what's happening. The materialism, which has always been there, is just worse now.
Yeah, but we're dealing with Roland's problem here. I think back to things that churches have done, and it seems to have especially emerged in the 1950s, and that's an interesting thing. Is the youth activities that the churches, the different youth groups, right? And that's, maybe I'm just aware of it only in the 1950s, and it had been going on all along. I'm not sure, but I'm not I don't know how many youth groups you would have had in medieval Europe. It's just a fascinating thing here where we want to give young people an opportunity to gather together as Christians, and if it's done well, you've got some boring parts and some fun parts, right? And that's the right mix there. If it's all fun and games, it's well, this is stupid. I mean, you might enjoy it, but it's this isn't really worth it. And if it's all boring, then you don't get them in. So you gotta have the balance worked in there pretty carefully. So that's the attempt, I guess, with the youth ministry. But I just don't know how well it bears fruit, because I wasn't really into it. I had a lot of family formation.
Why would you need that, right? If you didn't take, maybe not entirely, but if you didn't take art, music, gym, and religious teaching out of the school, right, there would be no reason to do it separately. And why is it with the children? Why do you isolate the children? We'll say with each other and group them together, which seems kind of like a recipe for disaster to me. Ultimately, Lord of the Flies, no one, right? Instead of integrating it back into the family, right? Because the purpose of the religion is to be integrative. That's in some sense, the entire purpose is forms of integration at all self-similar fractal layers of reality. And so when you don't do that, well, what caused that? Well, look, I hate to say it, it's psychology definitely contributed to that. And maybe it got put on hold for the second act of the Great War or something, however you want to frame that, right? But yeah, it comes roaring back in the 1950s. But the extent to which people were aware of Carl Jung in the 1950s. When I found that out, I was just terrified. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. People on the streets were badly interpreting Carl Jung in the 1950s. No wonder why we have a problem. That's a big problem. Nobody should be, first of all, the guy's a nutbag, but he does have some good work. But like nobody, as a casual person on the street, should have been engaging with that stuff. That's not good for you.
I would say things like church participation, if they're embedded within something larger, to your point, Mark, you know, if there's stuff going on in the schools, there's stuff going on in the homes, like there's a general integration, then it occupies a certain place within the overall life of people, right? But when you've got massive change happening in society and you are getting fragmentation between the generations, right, you end up getting this lack of cohesiveness between what your parents grew up with, what you've grown up with, what your kids are going to grow up with, right? And so then that creates a break and a disconnect. And so then we're like, well, okay, now that this is broken, we have to find a way somehow to plug our kids back in. And maybe we can't plug them back into a service that's being run in a traditional church, Protestant church, because they have no connection with it. And the whole thing, right, to your point, Father Eric, is boring and there's nothing in it for me, right? So we fire up something separate because we can't reintegrate the whole thing back into society because that's a massive problem.
It's way worse than that, Roland. When you engage with the video game reality and the flat world stuff and the closed world stuff, which a lot of people have, a lot of adults have too, what happens is you lose the skill of integration as such, and you individuate against your will effectively. And then as you individuate, you get more angry at everybody who isn't you because they're not you and they're not doing what you want. And then you get the humanism, like that's how humanism operates. Well, if we could just all realize we're all one body, it's like, but that wouldn't solve a problem because you've lost the skill. You should watch my maturity video, my friend. It'll be good. It covers all this. But when you've lost the skill of the poetic way of informing the world, and you need to fix that, right? Because to your point, you can't just drag people into church who found Peterson helpful directly. We've seen the result of that. It just doesn't work, right? It works for people who were in the church when they were young, but it doesn't work for people who either weren't in the church or sort of never got the churchy thing at all, or for certain people who were in the church but were traumatized. You cannot drag them back into church because they've lost the skill of reintegrating into church and even understanding the concept of something higher than themselves. I mean that technically. It's not just that they talk that way, they act that way. That's the problem.
Which is why you can't solve everything all at once, right? Mm-hmm. So people are trying to solve a piece that maybe they can. Let's fire up a youth group. Let's get at, to your point, Father Eric, let's get some young people together, at least, away from their computers into an environment where we can maybe start to shape this, right? We're going to have a problem plugging them back into church because what we're doing here doesn't necessarily fit with what's happening on a Sunday morning with the older people we've got here, right? And there's a struggle with that, but it's like, I have to do something, right? As a parent, I'm seeing the overarching problem and I can't solve all of it, but what do I do, right?
The on-ramping is the issue. That's why I like the on-ramping idea, even though I don't think Pastor Paul and the crew over there is doing a very good job of it, let's say. But I like that conceptually it's correct. The observation that you're taking people either in too large steps or too many steps too quickly, either way would work, right? Like that's happening. I think the problem with we're going to solve the problem that we see is that unless you solve the integration problem, it's not going to work. Now, I will once again, for the 9 billionth time, we've done this successfully. It's actually not that hard, but it doesn't work universally. Like you have to have people that will show up for a thing on a regular basis. But if you get a group of people that show up for a thing on a regular basis, we have stepped practices that for some weird reason, they just all end up at church. I don't know anything about it. That's what happened. It was 100% hit rate. It's a small sample size. I get that. Also, we kind of understand why. We have a very good predictive theory that we developed over 5 years as to how that happens. And it's all about this idea of actually integrating people into something and showing them that there's more to the world and involving them, again, step by step. It's actually like a 5 or 6 steps, depending on how you think about it. And that seems to work pretty reliably. And, it doesn't take a year. I mean, it could take a year, but it doesn't have to take a year for most people. And that's, not a full time. I'm not talking about send them to a monastery either. I'm talking about, something that you do maybe 2-3 times a week, hopefully daily, right? Hopefully five days a week is how we started out. But then slowly you up the volume, if you will, on the practices and change up the practices and keep the older ones, right, until you get them moved into the more complicated ones. And then when they go to the sort of the magic one, which we're calling exploring narrative meaning, then once they can do an explorative narrative meaning, which is roughly 3, 4, 5 sessions or something, they end up going to church. I don't know. I have whatever. I mean, it seems to work. And a lot of people are, how this is impossible. Like, bro, Holy Spirit, like chillax. It's not that hard. No, I think it won't just work to be Catholic. I think the Catholics are suffering from the same materialism and individualism and psychology isn't actually the devil, when of course it is. Problems that everyone else is suffering from. The Catholics, the only thing the Catholics have going for them is submission, and
we got a little more than that.
That's enough. Like that by itself will work in a rich enough environment. That's why it works for the Orthos and the Catholics.
Yeah. I actually encourage Mark in his projects here, and you said your book is going on sale in September. So yes. I'm sure regular listeners to this channel will be able to hear all about it. Maybe I'll put together like a book review of it and put that on as a video. Wouldn't that be a fun video for us?
You can absolutely do that, Father. If you want a copy, let me know and I'll ship one out to you when I get home.
Yeah.
And
yes. Yes,
Kirk. A slightly tangential question.
Sure. I think we were getting near the end of that. Mark is running out of breath. So,
do you think for people interested in Catholicism, is Don Quixote a good read?
I've never read that one, so I can't actually. I must have missed that in my world literature class. So I can give you some other ones that'd be a good read. Okay. People interested in Catholicism, if they can do Brideshead Revisited by Evelyn Waugh, that's a fantastic book. Just absolutely stunning. That guy was a jerk, Evelyn Waugh, but he really did believe, I think, and he was an excellent writer. So we'll just take the good and we'll let the Lord judge the bad.
How about Flannery O'Connor, since we're doing that book club occasionally still?
Flannery O'Connor's good, but that's a strong dose of medicine right there. You can't just show up. Well, I mean, you can. I did that to you, Mark, and you. The first words of that book club were, "What did you make me read?"
Yeah, you did it to me, and then you're like, "You can't do that to people. That's your father, Eric, and it's Mark. Then you can do it to people, no problem." I see.
Evelyn Waugh is a little easier to move, or if you want something that's a little more obscure, "Death Comes for the Archbishop" by what's her name, Willa Cather. She wasn't even a Catholic, but she wrote a fictionalized account of the first Archbishop of Santa Fe, and that's Wild West territory. This is mid to late 19th century, and just the hardships they were going through. That's another great Catholic novel. So unfortunately, I cannot comment on Don Quixote.
Yeah, I asked because I heard that Cervantes was a pretty devout Catholic, at least in his youth.
Yeah. I mean, he was a Spaniard, so he certainly would have been baptized, I think.
Yeah, but that's a super hard, confusing, postmodern-y type of self-referential story, and I think one of the problems is complicated literature. People don't even understand the allegory of Plato's cave. Let's go to easier literature for everybody, because people are very literate and they're not very good with comprehension. And you can kind of see that if you watch the Peterson Jubilee thing, and especially what I did was I watched PBK's interview with Greg, who was on Jubilee with Peterson first, and I thought Greg was pretty cool. And then Greg gets on Jubilee, and I was like, this guy's an idiot. What happened? Like, is it even the same person? Right? Because then you get to see people who use words, and they clearly aren't good at using words. And they know lots of words because they're highly autistic. But they may even understand some of the definitions, but they don't understand how to put the words together. Like one guy was calling himself an agnostic atheist. And I was like, he didn't say it. No one's dumb enough to put those two words together and think it's a thing.
I had a conversation with somebody yesterday who insisted on the validity of that terminology.
I even asked AI, and AI struggled mightily and gave a very poor excuse that didn't work because it was counter to the definitions of both words.
Yeah.
But I was like, yeah, this cannot work. Like, I don't know why you're trying to do this. But the AI is very prone to agreeable framing. So if it thinks that you're trying to do something, it will try to make it work, even when it clearly doesn't. Like,
to be fair, if we're going to have these daggone robots everywhere, I want them to respect me.
Well, that's the problem. They respect you and they take your word for it. But they, interestingly, sometimes they're very good at finding contradictions. So you can take, and I've done this several times now to test it. You can take YouTube transcripts and feed it in and say, well, there's 3 speakers here, and here are their names. And how many times did this guy contradict himself and on what? And it can very often tell you with fairly good accuracy. So at least don't listen to that podcast or watch that YouTube video because there's all these contradictions in it. So it can be useful for things like that.
Yeah. I really liked Death Comes for the Archbishop by Willa Cather because so much of what makes that book very appealing are just these descriptions of the southwestern United States landscape and the kind of harsh, desolate beauty that's out there, and her way of weaving that into the narrative of these extremely rugged missionary priests and bishops in that area and the different people that they encounter. So it's got a good thing for your imagination to grab onto. Her descriptions of these different things, and just very, very realistic portraits of people that you might meet, including troublesome priests that the bishop has to deal with when he shows up there, because he's, some of these priests hadn't had any real supervision in decades, and this guy shows up with a letter from the probably from the prefect of the Congregation for the Propagation of the Faith. Here's my letter. I'm in charge. Okay, here we go. See how this is going to work out. So that's what I'd recommend for literature. It's pretty linear and straightforward, and people shouldn't get too confused by it.
Yeah, I'll check those out. And also, the other one I heard is that even though he was Anglican, I heard that Jonathan Swift, Gulliver's Travels, was also popular with some Catholics.
Oh, I've never read that one either. I've heard it's mostly just some pretty straightforward satire, so you probably won't get too lost with that one. Lord of the World, I think, is mostly for people who are already inside the club. Yeah.
I never heard of Lord of the World.
Yeah, it was actually one of the first examples of dystopian literature in the English language. I think it was published in 1908, and it's set in sometime in the 1970s. So imagining what the 1970s are like in 1908, people were flying around the world in very fast Zeppelins in this book. Which is just, it's cool, like you can't beat it for being cool. But they also have like these weird stenographer machines that are working with typewriters. So it's very imaginative. But yeah, it's about the Antichrist showing up. So,
well, I would imagine then that would be more popular with people who are already in the church.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's got some, but if you're not already like on Team Catholicism, then like all of the pro-team Catholicism stuff is going to just kind of be irritating to you, because by this point in the story, everybody realizes what's coming and like goes back under the Bishop of Rome, except for some weird sects in America, but like the Orthodox and the Protestants have all, for the most part, come back to Rome. So if you're not in the mood for that kind of, Catholic triumphalism, it might be a little much for you. But I enjoyed it.
How about Name of the Rose? I haven't read it, but I still love the movie. We just watched it recently, like a week ago.
I've never read it, but Dr. Washburn said it was good. And
it's gritty. It's really dirty and gritty. It's a great. Taleb talks about him. He's a fairly famous writer. I think more for his articles and stuff than his. He also has a famous library. Look up his library. It's freaking awesome. Pictures of his library, videos of his library. Awesome. But he was like, a library should contain mostly books you haven't read yet. And I was like, yes, this guy's the best. Taleb talks about him all the time. I guess Taleb met him when he was still alive. But yeah, interesting guy, Echo.
Yeah, I don't remember anything about Roberto Eco, except I've heard that he had some definition of fascism, which I heard someone mentioning. But yeah, that's the only thing I've heard about him.
When I put my cassock on, I usually put a fascia on around my belt. Does that make me a fascist?
Not, I don't think Echo ever talked about that, but
okay, alrighty, because it's literally called the fascia. Wear it around. It's got kind of little dangling tassels at the end of it, So anyway, I just worried that I might be a fascist. I think a lot of people also heard that especially young men, heard that the new line of American Eagle advertisements were fascist, and probably concluded that they were fascist as well.
Echo has an article called Fascism, which upon a quick glance, although I've heard of this before, is a most excellent way to recognize fascism, because it's got 14 points and it's not a simple thing. But yeah, he was mostly an essayist. I think he only wrote like 2 or 3 books, but it's mostly essay. He's an interesting guy. And yeah, Taleb wrote about him in his books because he's so interesting. So, and you got to check out pictures of his library. Just look up Umberto Eco's library or something, and they'll come up, and it's like amazing. The guy's amazing.
Yeah. I'll look up pictures of his library. I don't know. And I definitely trust Taleb's judgment on almost anything.
I should add some of his books to the list, along with The Name of the Rose.
Yeah, and Freakonomics. So, Roland, one thing that I found kind of helped people, materialists in a way. In part of what Peterson does as his trick. I've been going through 12 Rules for Life, by the way, on my channel. So we're halfway through. We're doing 2 chapters a week. So it's a 6-week sort of blitz. But the thing that Peterson does, and the thing that I found helpful, so through books like Freakonomics and all of Taleb's stuff, obviously, the thing those 3 have in common is that they standardly use the tools of logic, reason, and rationality, or the tools of materialism, which is logic, reason, and rationality, to explain to you and demonstrate to you and also rationalize to you that the world doesn't work the way you think, and that there's a lot more going on, and therefore, right? And it's the and therefore that opens the door for the reciprocal opening that allows people to stop engaging in their closed world gently enough to start engaging in that higher world that we were talking about earlier, that spiritual realm. So one of my arguments for what Peterson does, and I am going to do another What Peterson Did video for the slow people in the class who watched the other 2 and didn't get it yet, is like he opens you up to new possibilities in a very methodical way, which if you're stuck in the propositional tyranny that John Vervaeke talks about leads to a procedural tyranny, because again, you don't have the poetic way of informing the world, so you have precious little choice about it. But when you step through it and you break it open, then you can start to look up, we'll say, and start to aim up at that bright star that Peterson talks about. And once you get that going, now you can start to have the discussions with people about, well, what's good about Tate and what's bad about Tate, right? What parts, right? Because you don't want to throw the guy under the bus, because we're living in this stupid binary world where it's like, well, Andrew Tate did this one bad thing or said this one bad thing or got misinterpreted in this one bad way, more likely, and therefore, right? It's like, no. You can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You have to be able to point, because it turns out, Roland, this might be a big shock to you, there are no perfect exemplars. And so the skill you need is not which is the good exemplar and which is the bad exemplar. That's retarded. The skill you need is which things about this exemplar should I copy and which things should I not copy. Wait, and you can't jump to that, Father, but you can't jump to that because it's too much too fast or too far in one leap or something, maybe both. But once you open people up to, we'll call it the paucity of materialism and logic, reason, and rationality as ways of understanding the world, then all of a sudden you can start to have these discussions about, well, what does that mean for the guys that you know now, the Andrew Tates, or the idea of a rock star, or dating somebody who's a rock star? Like what does that mean? Because these are the issues that come up over and over again. Recently, there's a baseball player, I think he's a Red Sox player actually, who was I guess dated or was married to Halle Berry, and he divorced her because he was a Midwesterner and she wasn't going to stay home and cook and clean and have kids. And he was kind of like, well, then what are we doing? And people jumped all over him for it, but actually it's kind of the right answer. Like, why would you even consider getting married to somebody who has a career that they're not going to let go of in favor of doing the things that would make you both stronger and better, right? Because, specialization, right? Somebody goes out and gets the food and somebody else stays home with the kids. And women are always better on average at staying home with kids, and men are always better on average at going out and getting the food. I don't know what to say. It's observably true. It's been true for thousands of years.
Are you sure you want to say always on average? It just sounds a little odd to me.
It does, but you have to nowadays. Otherwise, people go after you, right? Okay, all right. In other words, the average, right? You got to understand the religion of materialism, or all of the possible materialist religions are going to rely on absolutes. So you have to include the absolute, and you can't keep it an absolute. But you also have to reinvigorate the fact, because the trick they always play is the confusion of the specific for the general, right? So you could say, and I did this once. I was on a Clubhouse actually with Rafe Kelly, who I normally like, but also I said, the man makes the house and the woman makes it a home. And he said, well, actually, my wife built I'm like, dude, that's sample size of one. And I'm talking about on average. Like, you can't swap the two and say you're wrong. That doesn't work. It just you look stupid because you're talking about a single instance instead of the general case. And so I'm using verbal tricks like that sort of help people along with, no, don't jump down my throat. The average is always this. The average never changes. You can take all the samples you want. The average remains this, right? It doesn't go away, even though you don't like the answer.
80% of the time it works 100% of the time.
No, it's not. It's every time it works 100% of the time. That's my favorite line.
I just like to say that, this is a rule that'll be useful in 90% of cases. And that's actually really useful, That's the way I like to explain it. And, sometimes you'll meet exceptions to this rule, and that's fine. You just make space for exceptions as they come up.
Exceptions prove the rule. That's what I learned when I grew up. No one learns that now.
I've never actually understand what that meant, but...
It's not a rule if there's no exceptions. In fact, if there's no exceptions to something, you can't technically perceive it. I'm talking scientifically. It's imperceptible. Things that are smooth are imperceptible to you, and therefore you can't even talk about them. So, of course, the exception makes the rule, right? It wouldn't change, we'll say, the law of God, but it would certainly change the rules because it highlights them through contrast.
So, bottom line, postmodernism is silly.
So is modernism.
Evil. But yeah, it's also silly. It's evil and silly. True.
We'll have nothing silly here. This is a serious podcast for serious people. I'd like to warn this podcast not to become silly again.
Well, I've got some silly things to say, and it's not very silly at the moment, but with a little bit of funding, it could become rather more silly.
Oh, man.
We're all about the funding. We're all about the funding.
Also, I'm curious, was Moby Dick by Herman Melville? I heard that it has one of the guys' name was Ishmael, and I heard there was some biblical reference in that, but I don't know if Melville was Catholic.
He was not Catholic. Sadly, I would gladly go to his tomb and pray for literary favors there. But he certainly was. I mean, he was a guy who like read the backs of cereal boxes and like obscure travel accounts from the 18th century. So he read a lot of everything. So obviously he was very well educated in the Bible. And it is also worthwhile to note that he had the I don't know how you describe Ahab, but Ahab's certainly a major character in the story, and like his name does not go uncommented on. It's like I can't remember what they said about it, but it's like, yeah, his mother knew what she was doing when she named him Ahab.
Right. Well, but more importantly, Father, I think, yeah, that book is littered with biblical references, most of which, of course, I didn't get because I didn't read that silly book. But you could find out more because there's actually a Moby Dick book club that we did. And you could read along with us and learn a lot about that book because that is probably the best overall meaning crisis book. And then when you figure out when it was written, you're like, wow, Melville really saw this coming, didn't he? And if you want evidence of that, you can watch the Moby Dick Book Club on this fine channel. And I will show you all of that while Father Eric and Castle Adam show you all the rest of the stuff.
Wait.
All right. I'm dropping off. See you guys. Oh. Thanks for the chat.
See you, Roland. Good to have you on.
Take care, Roland. Great to see you.
Take care. Wait, did you not read the Moby Dick with the book club, Father?
I did.
Okay.
I don't remember every detail. I mean, it's a big chunky book, so like
it's a big book. All the actions at the very end in like 5 pages too, which is annoying, but fun.
So yeah, but I certainly remember the names of the major characters. Yeah, there's biblical allusions all over. Jonah comes up frequently, you know. Like, Jonah, he was the first whaler, you know. Quite the expert on the whales inside and out.
Ishmaelville, that was the best insight ever of all time, as far as I can tell. Castle is a genius. That was Ishmaelville. That book club was really fun, and everybody should watch it because they think they will learn a lot from it, especially if they read along and then read along with the chapters and then watch the book club on the chapters they just read. I think they'll get a lot out of it. And take notes. Always take notes.
Yeah. Yep. Still unbeaten for me. That is my favorite novel, even though it's like it is. It could induce Acedia in you if you consider the length of it. Maybe you want to read it as an ebook, and so you don't have to feel it sitting in your hands.
No, feel it in your hands. It's good for you.
Of course, as you watch your bookmark go through, you can feel a sense of joy and accomplishment at the progress you've made.
Yeah, it's good to do in chunks too. I like the chunks that you picked, Father. I think that works pretty well. And then if you don't like that book club, you can go in Navigating Patterns and watch the 12 Rules for Life book club. And then on the Texas Wisdom community, we had a book club on Plato's Republic. And of course, there's the Language of Creation, but that's oddly 40 episodes, some magical way. We only figured that out at the end. There's lots of good book clubs to engage with in the Peterson sphere. So you should partake.
I'll check it out. But if Melville wasn't Catholic, Does this mean there's hope for the Protestants?
I mean, hope for the Protestants. I think if they place
Individual
their trust in the
Protestants.
Lord, then they have a fair amount to hope for. Yeah,
Okay.
like I could certainly appreciate the formation that St. John Henry Newman got whilst he was in the Anglican Church. And we can look at all the wonderful things that he wrote when he was a Catholic, and all the frankly, wonderful things he wrote before he was a Catholic. His plain and parochial sermons are, I've only read a couple of them, but they're very much worth your time. And it's like, well, his Anglican formation, that's back when being an Oxford man really meant something. And they had a fine education. And I could look at the great apologetical and fictional work of C.S. Lewis, and think that there's quite a lot to recommend in there. Some people find the book Miracles to be very effective in helping tamp down the worst of their materialist tendencies, and to be able to see spiritual things a little more clearly. So that certainly is it's a good thing.
Anglo-Cathodoxy for the win, still, Father. I'm all
Yeah, and I don't know how much. So, like, everybody was some form of Christian back in those days, unless they were an explicit skeptic and atheist, which was very rare, although it was often notable in the 19th century. So it's hard for me to know how much of his actual church going had a big effect on him. You could certainly see, I mean, John Henry Newman, before he was a Catholic, he was an Anglican preacher. And C.S. Lewis certainly was proud of his Anglicanism. So yeah, I guess there's just a lot to recommend it in the old Anglican churches. The thing is, and I don't know if you were here for this part of the conversation with Ron when we were talking about some of the Catholic ecclesiology, talking about how the Holy Spirit does in fact move outside of the visible confines of the Catholic Church. And so, when you see what looks to be the fruit of real love of God and love of neighbor outside the Catholic Church, does it discredit Catholicism, or it doesn't immediately, call what this person who's not Catholic into suspicion? It just means that the Holy Spirit is moving in that person in a particular way, and even if they're lacking the fullness of communion with the Catholic Church, still something good can come out of that. So all of that to say that good things can happen in all sorts of places, and I am thankful to God for that. However, the best way to do things is still to go to Mass, to go to confession, to pray the Rosary, and to never ever skip leg day.
Yep. Amen to that, Father. And I was just looking online, and it said that he was raised, not Lewis or Newman, but Melville was raised in a strict Calvinist household. So there's even hope for some of them.
There's even hope for some of them,
There's hope for any person, according to the Catholics. You know who doesn't believe that? Any of the Protestants. I'm just saying there's an asymmetry here that might be worth paying attention to. It's really important. Yeah, the Catholics are not believers that the only way to be saved is through the Catholic Church.
Well,
it's a fundamental difference.
It is still technically through the Catholic Church, because the idea is they've broken off things that are properly ours and are using them.
Well, that's
or copying our notes.
Well, everybody else steals from the larger thing. But do you want the small Cliff Notes version, or do you want the larger thing with all the bells and whistles? And a lot of people just need those bells and whistles, and without them, it's just not great. It's not great. It's going to be harder for them.
Well, who even needs Cliff Notes anymore when we have ChatGPT?
Yeah, the flat world version of poorly written Cliff Notes. Yay! Yeah. Summarized.
It'll be interesting to see what the Pope and what Catholic ethicists say about AI in general and ChatGPT in particular.
I mean, it's the basic principle we've had for centuries now. It's like this is a tool, and the goodness of some tools I think are intrinsically evil. We can't come up with a good use for them, but the majority of them are good insofar as how they're used. So you're probably going to hear lots of restatements about how human beings are created in the image and likeness of God, that we have a unique capacity for insight, a unique capacity to care and to take responsibility for our actions, and that these tools that we've created cannot possibly replace that. And maybe a restatement which will be useful, that the human soul is created immediately by God at the moment of conception, and we it just is pretty incomprehensible that such a thing would ever happen at a TSMC fab. So we shouldn't expect it to happen, because all of that's running on math. Is it all math, Mark?
It's all math, and it's all explicitly randomness, and anybody who tells you differently is absolutely 100% lying, because I've built these things for over 15 years from scratch myself in C. It definitely is all math, and it definitely uses randomness, and that is how it operates. It doesn't operate any other way. So yeah, if anybody tells you differently, they're just making shit up.
Yeah.
It seems like ChatGPT will never have like ethical. There's not going to be ethical considerations for it having rights, because it'll never have like a soul.
Right. So it doesn't have the capacity to take responsibility for what it's doing.
Right.
That's why the hallucinations are sometimes so funny, right? Like, oh yeah, go ahead, and mix a little bit of glue in with your pizza crust to thicken it up. That's a great idea. A healthy diet should include a couple of rocks every day.
Right.
It's just the confidence with which it states that, and it's just like a weird little bit of randomness popping out of the code.
Right. But it's not hallucinations. This is the funny part to me. It's like, it's lying. I mean, you can say it's lying because it's hallucinating, but hallucination makes no sense with a bunch of random math, because that doesn't.
Hallucination is a property of organic matter, not
exactly.
Inorganic matter.
Hallucination is a property of organic matter, and hallucination, even in the scientific sense, relies on an unconscious. Well, AI doesn't have an unconscious and a conscious. It doesn't make any sense. And there aren't two systems. There are two systems in humans. Why Peterson and other psychologists don't harp on this like Freud and Jung did, I will never know, because they understood all of the good stuff, or all of the action, or the majority of it, comes from your unconscious, not your conscious. So your rationality ain't doing you no good anyway. I don't know why people are harping on it, but that AI doesn't have any of that. And that's the problem, is that, when you're using random numbers and a vector database that figures out how far away words are from one another using a particular type of measure, which is not a bad measure at all, by the way, because it does search pretty damn well, you're going to get lies. And those lies are going to be the result of more randomness and or poor training. They're not going to be the result of a hallucination where it has an imaginal and it wouldn't matter. Like, if you lie because you imagined something to be true that wasn't, you still lied. Like, I don't care. I don't know why they call it hallucination. It seems like a deception to me.
Well, the only thing I'm skeptical about there is, if it's not conscious, I don't know if it could count as a lie, because to me, lying requires some sort of intentionality.
Mark has his own way of using the word lying.
No, lying doesn't have intentionality. People lie all the time without intention. If you don't know any better, you're still lying. If it's not true, it's not true. This isn't that hard.
He doesn't distinguish between disinformation, misinformation, and lying. It's all.
Yeah, there's no distinction to be made. Either it's true or it's not true. If you speak a not truth with confidence, we'll say, like, you don't say like, well, I think, or I've observed, right? That's not making a truth claim at that point. But if you say, well, definitely it's impossible for somebody to steal an election, that's a lie. It's an obvious lie. Elections get stolen all the time, all around the world. It's been happening since since pottery shards, which don't actually solve the problem as much as we all wish they would, like that's still a lie. and there are stupid people who will say things like that because they don't know any better. But that doesn't. I don't have access to that, and you don't have access to that, almost certainly. And so you have to call a lie a lie because you really don't have a choice to speculate about how they arrived at the incorrect information. It's not within your purview in most cases.
And it is useful to note that the Catholic moral tradition, oftentimes in a confessional setting, would take intentionality in what you say as being very important to consider morally, and would distinguish lying from what we might say is reckless speech. We would do that in the confession. But since Mark is not Catholic, he has not submitted himself to Catholic Church or to Catholic language, then he doesn't.
But you're talking about two different things, and we have this instantiated in law. Cases have two phases, criminal cases, right? Phase 1 is determining guilt or innocence, and phase 2 is determining punishment. And punishment is all wrapped up in intent.
Mm-hmm.
They have subsequently wrapped up the charges, which is inappropriate, bad, and wrong, and legal wrong turn for sure. I don't even think any lawyers disagree. It's a first and second degree murder versus manslaughter. Being determined in the guilt or innocence is an error. It's just a legal error. It leads to all kinds of drawn out cases. For no reason.
Interesting. Okay.
Right? Yeah, because
so you should just be able to say you caused this person to die, and then the judge determines if it was first, second degree murder or manslaughter.
It doesn't even have to be the judge. I mean, it is in some systems, interestingly, by the way, because we don't have one smooth legal system throughout the state that works. All the states that works the same way. Didn't know that, did you? Right. We have 50 legal systems. Well, 51, one for the federals, a few more because there's territories and DC has special laws and whatever. But like the guilt of somebody being responsible for somebody dying can be done independently and used to be done independently from the punishment phase. The punishment phase can account for the layer of intent or the level of possible intent, which are two different things, by the way. And that could mediate whether or not they get punished even. So yes, they're guilty. This person definitely died. They definitely died at the hands of this other person, but it was a pure accident, and therefore we cannot punish them. There's nothing wrong with that. That does happen now. It's just because we have this, there was a weird procedural thing done, and I don't remember all the details because I'm not a lawyer and I hate lawyer things. At some point there was a procedural detail where they started doing this craziness with no, you have to give them in the exact charges up front, and that has to be known up front, and there's no deviation. And then that eventually morphed into, well, we're going to charge them with all three and see what the jury comes back with. And no, why are you doing this? But you see that in the case, like you can see that. I just happened to be alive long enough to watch the progression of it, where I saw it didn't happen, and then this other thing happened, which made no sense. And now it's this third thing where they just accuse you of everything and see which one sticks with the jury. And I'm like, this is dumb. We already have a way to deal with this. We should just use the existing method.
Interesting. That is history that I've never heard before. I specialize. Yeah. So when you transfer that into the confessional context, I'm the judge, and the person's coming before me and accusing themselves of sin. And my job is to figure out how serious it is, and also whether or not they're sorry. They're almost always sorry because they came to me. I'm not hunting them down. So, that part's usually pretty easy. And then we can just kind of like suss out the intent. It's like, well, did you really mean to say things that you knew were not true, or were you confused about them and spoke recklessly? Because those are two different things. Reckless speech isn't.
That determines their repentance and their penance.
Yeah.
Confess, repent, and do your penance. Yeah. That's perfect.
So anyway, all of that to say that Mark uses lies the way he does, and I don't think I'm going to change his mind, so I don't bother. I do warn people about it, though. It's like, hey, listen, when he said that guy was a liar, this is what Marx pragmatic philosophy means, and there you have it. So
Yeah, was in terms of legal philosophy or legal thought, was Antonin Scalia particularly a good representative of Catholicism?
I'd say so. I don't know American legal stuff well enough to say one way or the other was Scalia. And yeah. So, what I actually don't want them to do is to just start like sneakily legislating Catholic values from the judges bench, because I don't want any of our judges to do that. And like, if we're going to bother with having a representative form of government and like the division of powers, like we should actually just do that well, or have a king, like, and then not do that. But
Render
like, if
unto
we're
Caesar. Either way,
yeah,
render unto Caesar. Yeah.
right.
Don't
So
interfere. Yeah.
so I think it was Scalia. I think he said that, like, if you don't walk away from decisions that you're convinced are correct and you really don't like, that means you didn't do your job properly as a jurist. I think he said that. So all of that to say, certainly his son's a priest, right? A priest of the Diocese of Arlington. So, I think he did, and he's well respected. I have a collection of essays that he published. I think he's the vicar for clergy, which in a large diocese is a high trust position. You wouldn't want to put just any. That's not where you park somebody that you don't know what to do with. It's a high. So yeah. So I don't really have the capacity to answer. It is funny how represented Catholics are on the Supreme Court. There's just something about our formation that makes legal thought flow from us.
No, justice has to be done through the lens of morality and ethics, and everyone else ain't got a good enough one. I don't know. It is what it is.
Yeah.
Not my fault.
One time I heard the explanation for it being that so it was Rabbi David Wolpe who was speaking about this, and to be fair, he's not someone I appreciate generally, and I don't think he's a good representative of Judaism, but in any event, he was saying that, and I do think this point of his is true, that the reason that both Catholics and Jews have a lot of lawyers in their communities is that both of them have a strong oral tradition compared to the sola scriptura of the Protestants.
Oh, that'd be interesting. The oral tradition, yeah, because much of our sacred tradition is not written down, right? So, yeah.
Well, plus, I think, to be perfectly fair, although the Protestants will squeal like stuck pigs, they aren't good at rhetoric at all. They're very good at interpreting for themselves, but rhetoric has no overlap with self-interpretation. Like the ancient Greeks were pretty freaking clear about this. Actually, this is not quite, but wrapped up in the difference between, we'll say, a sophist and a quote true philosopher, if you want to go with Plato. So that's part of the issue, is that while it may seem that people who focus highly on propositions and sort of sola scriptura would be better at law, because the Bible's not a legal text in any way, shape, or form. And it's in sola scriptura, it is by definition subject to personal private interpretation and not to something like rhetoric, which is held up above other things. Then they wouldn't even be good at it on average. So what would you expect? And yeah, the oral tradition points to that in a way, and also boosts that point directly. But I think really interpreting text on your own is not conducive to good legal theory.
Yeah. Yesterday I had the opportunity to celebrate the Latin Mass, and I gave a homily that would be impossible to give in a Protestant church, because I was talking. The reading was Jesus cleansing the temple. So I talked about how the temple was structured, with the outer courtyards moving into the altar of the Holy of Holies. I was like, hey, look at this church here. We've got like these different concentric rings coming in. And then, hey, guess what? That's also the same way that you're structured. Like you have parts of yourself that are open to the public, parts of yourself that you only let certain people in, and you expect them to behave a certain way. Then you got that one part at the very center of your heart where the highest thing belongs, and that's the only thing that should be there. And Jesus is zealous about keeping your temple clean. So when you call on him in times of distress, when something is going to come and defile him, you should expect him to show up with a whip and to drive all of the evil things away. And there is a temptation that is prominent in our community when we have all these glowing things around us, and that is to stay up too late. But I have seen outside my window, and it's dark outside, and the rational thing to do under this circumstance is to go to bed. So we're going to be wrapping this stream up. I hope you all enjoyed it. Go to mass, go to confession, pray the rosary, and don't skip leg day. God bless you all.
Sure.